good afternoon. My name is Paul Rudensky. I'm the director of JewishGen and the Peter and Mary Calico Center for Jewish Genealogy Research at the Museum of Jewish Heritage here in New York City. I just want to say a few words about our topic and then go into some logistics. So it is impossible to overestimate the importance of Sephardic Jewry for its impact on Jewish history and culture throughout the generations. Before the riots of 1392, the Jewish community of Spain was one of the most culturally and demographically important communities that had ever existed in world Jewry. Due to the pogroms that began in 1392 and the pressure on Spanish Jews to convert to Catholicism, the importance of Judaism in Spain declined. With the expulsion in 1492, however, the Jews from Spain and a few years later from Portugal with that expulsion, the extraordinary influence of Iberian Jewry was spread throughout the world. Vibrant communities were created in North Africa, the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire, in Amsterdam, and then as far-flung places as Hamburg and Poland and British North America. Sephardic Judaism was far more influential beyond their numbers due to the spread of Hebrew liturgical poetry, Jewish mysticism, and the initial steps towards the revival of the Hebrew language. And this is just a short list. There are many more things. Today, we will learn about the origins of Sephardic Jewry and its dispersion after 1492. We will also learn how to dive into historical and genealogical research of this crucially important community. Our guide today will be Sarina Roffé, and let me tell you a little bit more about her. And we're really honored that she's joining us today. Sarina Roffé is a professional genealogist, the editor of the journal DOROT, and the founder of the Sephardic Heritage Project. She is the author of Branching Out From Sepharad, which was produced by the Sephardic Heritage Project, which outlines the history of Jews of Spain, the 1492 expulsion, their history in Syria, and their immigration to the Americas. In addition to serving as the director of the JewishGen Sephardic Research Division, she is also co-chair of the Brooklyn Jewish Historical Initiative. Sarina is also the author of Backyard Kitchen, Mediterranean Salads, a cooking app called Sarina's Sephardic Cuisine, which is available in the Apple Store, as well as hundreds of articles. She is responsible for the translation and databasing of marriage and Brit Milah records on JewishGen. She has acquired several databases of Sephardic records, including cemetery records from Mexico, Venezuela, Cuba, and Argentina. Sarina presents often at IAJGS conferences and has completed over a dozen genealogies through her genealogy consulting business, Sephardic Genealogical Journeys. This program will be recorded, but we have a backlog on uploading recordings to YouTube, but we do look forward to making them public soon. Sarina will give her presentation and then we will have time for questions. I expect that this will go between that her talk will go between 40 and 50 minutes, and then we'll have time afterwards for questions. Please enter your questions into the chat. This is a series of webinars that are given on Wednesday afternoons over Zoom. Sarina will be returning next week on January 14th, and we'll be speaking about Sephardic Jews in colonial America. After that, on January 21st, we will have a talk about Jewish soldiers in the Civil War. Then our next talk will be on January 28th, when Ralph Stern, who is a professor at the University of Manitoba, will be speaking about the history of Anne Frank's family, and we'll tie things back to a portrait of Anne's ancestor, which still hangs in Frankfurt today. So without further ado, I am honored and pleased to hand our microphone over to Sarina Roffé.
Hi, everyone. How are you? I'm going to get started by sharing my screen. And Paul, you'll let me know if I did this right. Okay. Do we have a full screen? Okay. All right. So as Paul had mentioned, we're going to talk about 1492 and the Sephardic dispersion around the world. And then I'm going to go into a little bit of a guide on Sephardic genealogy, sources for it, and things you can do to find your family tree or to identify sources that might be beneficial to you. So he's already gone into my background, so I'll skip that. Let's talk about, so Spain at the time, and we're talking before the 10th century, was divided into Muslim Spain and Christian Spain. So Muslim Spain started about 711 with the Umayyad dynasty. And from the 10th to the 11th centuries is considered the golden age of Spain. That was when you had Maimonides and Nachmanides and Halevi. And these people, these rabbis produced very, very important works. There was also a recognized leader in the court of the Umayyad dynasty named Hasdai ibn Shafrut. And he was really the official leader of the Jews. He was a patron of Jewish learning, a statesman, and the first of many, but he led and he defended the Spanish Jewish community within Islamic Spain. So the golden age of Spain was, it was a time when there was Talmudic scholarship, Jewish philosophy, Hebrew poetry. It all reached a peak. There was a school on the Talmud formed by Rabbi Alfasi, the Rif. Maimonides wrote the Code of Jewish Law during the 12th century. And one of the most important commentaries on the Chumash was written by Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra. This period of Jewish scholarship has never again been equaled. It was really an amazing time. Now we go to Christian Spain. So Christian Spain was a completely different story. Christian Spain, you started to have a series of pogroms, what we call today pogroms. We think of pogroms in Eastern Europe, but there were pogroms in Christian Spain in 1391. They were in Ischia, they were in Seville, they were in Valencia. In July, after there was this riot in Valencia, the Jewish community had been destroyed, Palma de Mallorca. And in Valencia, a few weeks after the pogrom, the king ordered all the Jews who were hiding to go back to their homes. And then he decreed that the synagogues not be burned. And then he confiscated all of their property. So it was not a great time. You had pogroms. It just spread across all of Spain. It spread. It was in Barcelona. Then it was in Castile. There was a lot of hate and rioting and a lot of conversions that happened during this period. And new Christians could not even practice secretly without fear of persecution. So we know that in 1469, Ferdinand and Isabella marry. And the idea was that they were uniting their kingdoms. They were first cousins in the house of Trastamara. The reigning house of Castile and Aragon and Portugal. And it wasn't long before they took back the last remaining Moorish kingdom of Granada in the south. So they were pushing out all of Muslim Spain. It wasn't actually until 1492 that the last vestiges of the Muslims were finally kicked out, were finally really got out. Okay? Now, Ferdinand and especially Isabella was a devout Catholic. She was heavily influenced by the church. She loved the church, and that really guided a lot of what happened in Spain for the remainder of the 15th century. What had happened was, we know that a lot of people converted in 1391, and there was a lot of pressure over many years for Jews to convert to Catholicism. And we know today that some of them kept and became secret Jews. They had places that they hid their Judaism. But what happened was, if you think about it, let's say you have two brothers, one converts and the other doesn't convert. You still have the same family. You still have the same social strata. So what often happened was that even though you were a new Christian, because you converted, you that you were under suspicion because of who was around you. Okay, you might have a husband and wife. One converts, one doesn't. So what they did was they passed a law called Limpia de Sangre. Now, Limpias de Sangre separated out new Christians from those who were born Christian. And it basically said you had different rights. If you were born Christian, then you had no problem. But if you had converted to Christianity, even if it was your parents or your grandparents who converted, you're still considered a new Christian. So you were under the Limpia de Sangre laws, which basically meant you were always going to be under suspicion. The Inquisition starts in 1481. It's not to target Jews. People misunderstand that idea. The Inquisition was to target new Christians, Jews who converted to Christianity, okay, who were not true to the faith, or who were suspected of not being true to the faith. And that's an important distinction. We as Jews think that even if they converted, they're still Jewish, which is true in our minds. But according to the church, if you converted, you were Catholic. Same if you were Muslim. If you converted to Islam, you were considered Muslim. You weren't considered Jewish anymore. So it's important to understand this very important distinction. So in 1492, the king and queen decided the only way that they could get rid of this influence of Jews was if the Jews had left, if they were out of the country. So they issued the Alhambra Decree, or the Edict of Expulsion, on March 31st, 1492, and the idea was to expel all Jews from Christian Spain. So Jews had a choice: convert to Christianity or leave. And all of the territories of Spain, and understand, Spain extended into parts of what we know today as Italy. So there were a lot of territories that were under Spanish control. The actual date was August 4th, 1492, which coincides with the destruction of the First and Second Temple. It was also the date Columbus sailed to America. And we know that Columbus had several people on his ship who had been conversos. Now, it turns out that Columbus, his trip, the king and queen could not afford to support Columbus. He was out the door. He was rejected several times. But there were conversos in the court of the king and queen who said they would fund it. And we have documentary proof that the conversos in the court of the king and queen loaned money to the royal house in order to fund Columbus's trip to America. And it was viewed by the Jews, or by those conversos, as a possible place for Jews to go. The Edict of Expulsion was not revoked by Spain until 1968, following the Second Vatican Council. So you can see how long it was in effect. So it was illegal to be Jewish in Spain from August 2nd, 1492 until December 1968. This is the Alhambra Decree. You can get this on the internet, and you could see the seal of the king and queen. And we should mention that Isabella was heavily influenced by a priest named Torquemada. Torquemada is the person who was the driving force behind the Inquisition. Now, where do they go? Okay, some convert. About half, and the estimates on this range, go to Portugal. The estimates, I have 60,000, but I've heard 90,000, I've heard 80,000. And others dispersed to North Africa, to Italy, to countries around the Mediterranean. Some go underground as conversos. The Ottoman Empire sends ships. He welcomes them, and he says, your loss is my gain, because the Jews are going to bring important skills to the Ottoman Empire. So why do they go to Portugal? Well, it's right next door. The Spanish language is very close to the Portuguese language. And the King of Portugal welcomes them. And he says, we need the skill set and the economy that will drive, that the Jews will drive. Okay? But he tricks them. So this is a map, I got it off the internet, that shows some of the routes, the migration routes of the Jews. So the red lines are those that go from, let's say, the late 15th century into the 17th century. And you could see it's Egypt, it's what's today Israel, it's into Western Turkey. It even goes up into Belgrade. A lot of going to Italy. We know from the Livorno papers and the Livorno records that a lot of people had settled in Livorno and then went on to Syria or to other places in the Middle East as Spain was infiltrating, as Spain was was following them. So King Manuel, so now in 1492, there's a different king in Portugal. He dies, King Manuel takes over, and in 1497, King Manuel becomes engaged to the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. But a condition of the marriage is expulsion of the Jews. I mean, Isabella's like, not unless you get rid of them Jews. So, but he doesn't want to get rid of them. His economy's thriving. The country's doing well. The Jews have all kinds of connections in terms of import, export. They've brought a thriving economy to the country. And so what he does is he says, okay, we're going to get rid of our Jews, but he doesn't let them go. He gathers them at the ports and he forcibly converts every single Jew. Worse than that, he takes away their children and he sends them to one of his islands, to San Miguel Island. Very, very cruel to us, and most of them die. All right, so now in 1536, the Portuguese begins their Inquisition. But descendants of Jews who had converted back in 1391 are under suspicion, right? Even though it's 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, right? It's 140 something years. And they're still on, so it's like 3 or 4 generations, and they are under suspicion. So a lot of these Jews left Portugal for places with more lenient legislation, and where their unique skill sets as merchants could thrive. So Amsterdam becomes one of those places. Because many of the refugees were traders, Amsterdam benefited from their arrival. And the Jewish community grew rapidly. Some left for Brazil, where Europeans were Portuguese speaking. The Dutch Republic seceded from Spain in about 1581. And that's when you start to see a lot of Jews going to Amsterdam. So why Amsterdam? Religious tolerance. There isn't the discriminatory laws that were common in other places. There was the Amsterdam officials understood that the economic aspects of the Portuguese community could provide well. They weren't susceptible to labeling. You understand that Amsterdam is where a lot of the Quakers were living, where they really had this idea of religious tolerance. So the Jews of Amsterdam had greater freedoms in religious and economic spheres of everyday life. And so they assimilated well. But understand something. You're talking 150 years after they've had access to rabbinic Judaism. So even though these Jews are going into Amsterdam, they don't have an understanding of rabbinic Judaism. What is Shabbat, right? They have to relearn all of this. What is keeping kosher, right? They know they're Jewish. They know there are certain traditions that have been handed down, like lighting candles on Friday night, but they know they're supposed to circumcise their young at 8 days. But the idea of living under rabbinic influence, where a rabbi is guiding you in your everyday life, that is a new concept for them. And so integration into Amsterdam society as Jews takes some time. So they formed several synagogues, Beth Jacob in 1602, Neve Shalom in 1608, Beth Israel in 1618, and the three of them merge to become the Portuguese Jewish congregation. This is a photo that I took when I was there a few years ago. But this congregation produced rabbis, scholars, theorists, bankers. They were managers of international trading houses. They also produced people like Spinoza, who was excommunicated by the congregation in 1656. So you have this start of the Spanish-Portuguese community, and other congregations around the world followed this model. Okay, like She'ereth Israel in Manhattan is a Spanish-Portuguese synagogue. There's one in London. Now, many of the Jews went to the Americas, or conversos went to the Americas. Now, why the Americas? It's a new place. They don't think the Inquisition is going to follow them. Now, the Dutch had holdings in Recife in Brazil. And there, many Jews succeeded very well there. They had sugar plantations. They were all the way into the Caribbean Antilles until the mid-17th century. The Dutch fleet captured Curacao in 1634. So there's one of the oldest synagogues in the Caribbean is in Curacao. I think the oldest. No, maybe it's, Curacao. A generation later, you have Jewish and Protestant families from the Netherlands settling in Willemstad, which is in Curacao. And by the 1680s, the Portuguese community in Amsterdam starts to decline. And because the Jews are going to the New World, right? They're going to the New World. They hope that in the New World that they can settle and live peacefully. And here you have a map that shows places that they were going in the New World. They were going to Brazil a lot and a lot to Central America, right? And then you have that famous trip to New York. You have that famous trip to New York in 1654. You have people following the French. So, and then also you have people going to West Africa. That's another place that they're going. And still some going further into the Middle East. So Curacao, the community in Curacao dates to the 1650s. It was the first synagogue building, was purchased in 1674. It was known as Snoa, which is short for Esnoga, which is the Portuguese Ladino word for synagogue. Mikveh Israel was the oldest synagogue in the Western Hemisphere and is the oldest in continuous use. It's now Reconstructionist. It was established in 1732. And it was modeled after the synagogue in Amsterdam to serve the Spanish and Portuguese Jews from the Netherlands and Brazil. I was there. It still has a sand-covered floor. And it's to remind congregants of their makeshift prayer houses that they had, to muffle the sound so denouncers would not turn them in. They also have the oldest Jewish cemetery still in use in the Western Hemisphere. Now, in the Caribbean, there's the other Dutch island is Sint Eustatius, where the ruins of the synagogue still stand on Synagogue Pad. There's an older one in Suriname, Beracha ve Shalom, which was built between 1665 and 1671. However, these are no longer in use. Idamarco. So the Dutch West Indies invaded Idamarco in 1624. They get Recife in 1630. There's a new Christian called Simon Drago, who's the son-in-law of Rabbi Jacob Franco Lagarto, who bought a Sefer Torah in 1633 in Amsterdam, and he brings it to Idamarco. Now, in 1634, the Dutch allow religious freedom. So Idamarco is located north of Recife, and it was under Dutch control until 1646. There's a Jewish pirate, and yes, I have a presentation on Jewish pirates, named Mose Cohen Enrique, and he applied for permission to bring a group of Sephardic colonists to Brazil. They arrived in Idamarco in 1635, 100 to 200 people. The synagogue was owned by the rabbi. Now, in Recife, they have these sugar plantations, and sugar is big business. It makes them very, very, very rich. So they're there until 1655, and they have a synagogue, they have a rabbi, they have more than one synagogue. They have another synagogue on a nearby island, but the Dutch troops lose Recife in 1654. And that forced many of the Dutch refugees from Brazil to move to Curacao or Manhattan. So in 1654, the first 23 Jews arrived by ship. Now, there's a little bit of a story that goes with this. And when I talk about colonial America next week, you'll have that story. Peter Stuyvesant, who's the governor, denies them admission, and they write to the Dutch West Indies Company. And the Dutch West Indies Company is controlled by who? Jews. So they're given access. The first thing they ask for is a place to bury their dead. They get a small cemetery. They start She'ereth Israel, a congregation known today as She'ereth Israel. And from She'ereth Israel, other Sephardic synagogues are established up and down the East Coast due to commercial ties and marriage. And again, that's something we're going to cover next week in my presentation. So the first synagogues are Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia, Thoreau Synagogue in Newport, and Mikveh Israel in Savannah. And the Savannah, I've been to all three of these synagogues, and they're really quite beautiful. So let's talk a little bit about their migration. So they go to North Africa, they go to the Ottoman Empire, they go to in the Middle East, they go to Amsterdam, they go to the Americas. In the Americas, the Inquisition is following them, so they go underground. Conversos in South America start to escape by moving north. So on this map, we know that they were in many countries in South America, but they start to try and escape the Inquisition by moving north, moving into Mexico. Spanish are in Mexico, moving into the United States. We know today that there were groups of Jews who had done this migration who ended up in New Mexico and lived separately from other groups and intermarried over the course of several hundred years, and their DNA proves that they were still Jewish. So another presentation by Dr. Rhodes. Now let's start and talk about your family history and why you do a family tree. So switching subjects here. Did you know there are 477 genealogies in the Torah? If you sit on Shabbat in synagogue, you see so-and-so beget so-and-so, beget so-and-so, beget so-and-so, and he beget this child and this child and this child. And we actually can trace the family tree down from Adam and Eve all the way to King David if you follow the family trees that are in the Torah. So I say know where you're coming from to know where you're going. You need to have your roots. And with each generation, you lose that. You lose a little piece of yourself. So you want to connect your past family to future generations. I got started in genealogy because I come from a very big family. I have 52 first cousins. My father was one of 10. My mother was one of 8. And I knew all my cousins. Even though there were 52 of them, we always got together at our grandparents' house. Every week we had to visit our grandparents, so all the cousins were there, and it was chaos with love. But often we would go to a wedding or a bar mitzvah or just see somebody in the grocery store, and my mother would say, "This is my cousin, Renee. This is my cousin." And I would not understand how they were her cousins and not one of my first cousins. So I began to sit at the kitchen table with these diagrams where she would explain to me, okay, my grandmother had all of these siblings, and these are all of their and list all of their children, and then list all of their children. And it gradually grew into me being the family historian and the family genealogist. And it connected past my ancestors with my grandchildren. Okay, this just to show you how much research I've done. This is a book that I did just on my father's family. Look how thick it is. And it's got family trees, it's got stories, it's got anecdotes, it's got little biographies, it's got photos. So your family tree is not just about the data. Family tree is about the story, okay? It's what's the story? So Paul went into this. I started an organization called Sephardic Heritage Project, and I'm loving the fact that we're working so closely now with JewishGen because now everything's going on JewishGen, and it's fabulous. So it's been really, really, really nice to have such a close relationship with JewishGen. So what do you do when you're doing a family tree? Well, first you start with what you know. I get emails from people, oh, my grandfather, he came from here, but they don't give me a name, they don't give me any information, right? What can you find out about my grandfather? Grandfather who they haven't given me even a name. So start with names and dates of birth. Where was the person born? You might have a common name like Jacob Cohen, and there might be 100 Jacob Cohens out there. So where were they born? Do you have a date of birth? Who did they marry? And sometimes who they married gives you the date of birth because then you have another piece of data. Who were their children? What are their dates of birth? Where were they born? Right? When were they married? Where were they married? Was there a congregation that they got married in? A city? Anything. Fill in your tree with as much information as you know. Every detail counts because it's going to help you narrow down the information. Start with elders. I always say go to the oldest person in the family for data, for names, for dates. Write down their stories. And sometimes you have to ask the question in the right way. There's like a trigger, right? I had been doing my mother's family tree for years. And one day I was sitting with my uncle And I said to him, yeah, you know, in 1907, the Ottoman Empire fell. They started to conscript Jews into the army. And he said, yeah, my father was conscripted into the army. And I'm like, all this time I'm doing the family tree. You never told me that story, right? So the way you ask a question or sometimes there's a trigger. Why did they immigrate? My father-in-law's family, the children were born in 4 different cities: Tangier, Oran, Buenos Aires, and Casablanca. There was a story there. What are traditions in your family? There's a picture here of a shawl. This is a shawl that I turned out my great-grandmother brought from Syria. It's the shawl that she wore, that her mother wore when carrying my grandfather for his Brit Milah in 1891. We had it tested, and it dates back to the mid 19th century. Everybody in our family wears that shawl at a Brit Milah in our family. So every time a little boy is born, we take it out of the safe. They wear it. I have hundreds of pictures of my relatives, my cousins wearing it for their grandchildren's Brit Milahs. So these are important traditions that you want to know about your family. You also want to know about where they came from and the politics. So I was doing a family tree and I noticed dates. This was from Calcutta. And I was like, wait a minute, wasn't that the time of Gandhi? And she was talking about protests. And then I realized that what was happening with Gandhi and the protests and the British were affecting their family life, and that this was an important reason of why they left Calcutta. What was the status of the Jews? Were they citizens? Were they not citizens? What kind of status did they have? What was their economic situation? What did they do for a living? Like, what did your ancestor do for a living? Right? You want to know all this. Then I tell you, find the box. It might be a shopping bag, and it's up in some closet. And this is a box that is gold, diamonds, because it's got all those old pictures in black and white, and it's got those pictures of people who, you know, who are your ancestors. And those pictures or documents, ketubot, Brit Milah records, marriage certificates, old passports, which tell you where they traveled, census records, business records, what businesses did they own? All of this is part of your family story. Try and do a video interview with an elder, right? We did, there was a photo that I had found in a box in my mother-in-law's closet, and no one knew who this person was. No one knew who she was. She's not related to us. We don't know how this picture came about. One day my son gets an email. Now, in Sephardic families, we name for our parents. We honor our parents by naming the first son and the first daughter for the father's parents, and the second son and second daughter for the mother's parents. Alive or dead, it doesn't matter. We're honoring them. And he gets a phone call and an email, and this woman reaches out and she says, my great grandfather was named Simon Roffé. He was from Tangier. He had 3 daughters, Sada, Pauline, and Flora, and he was in the tobacco business. Now, this was way too many coincidences. My father-in-law's father was from Tangier. His name was Simon Roffé. He was in tobacco, and he had 2 sisters, Pauline and Flora. Way too many coincidences. We met, and it turned out she had the same picture I did, and on the back of it was the name of the person, and it turned out to be my husband's great-grandmother. So these things are gold, and you never know how they're going to play out. I do not recommend inputting. This is my personal thing. People can do what they want. I do not input data onto a website like Ancestry or MyHeritage. I prefer using software. There's lots of software out there. I, in particular, use Family Tree Maker because it connects to Ancestry, and it connects to not to MyHeritage, although maybe that changed recently. It's a family search. So you can upload it as private, and then when people find hints, they can reach out to you. I also find that it's very versatile in terms of your ability to download the data, export a GEDCOM, which is the file that you would get. You can make books for it. You can make charts. I find it to be very versatile. For example, this is just a small family tree. I made all the guys blue. I made all the women pink. I made the women's boxes rounded, the men's boxes square. I put in their dates of birth. I changed the font size to make it bigger. I could put a title, all kinds of things that you can do with the software. And lots of softwares have capability, but I think it's important to keep your stuff private, and then allow people to reach out to you if there's a hint or if there's something on your tree that matches what they're looking for. You should know a little bit about surnames. So surnames have meaning. In the Middle East, there are a lot of families with double surnames, and those represent separations of tribes. So analyze if your family followed Sephardic naming patterns, because that helps you with the naming. And if there's a discrepancy, ask them, why wasn't the first son named for, right? If there's a Ashkenaz Sephardi mixed marriage, sometimes you get a little bit of pushback on the naming. Online databases, this is something that's very common with all searches for family histories. These are all listed here, but there's many, many, many more. I wanted to talk a little bit show you just a couple of records so that you could see a few things. So this was somebody we were looking for, and we found him, and it told us why he died. It told us where he was buried. It took a while to find it, but it did help the family get some closure. I had a lot of trouble finding my grandmother's ship record, and let me tell you how it was found. So this is my grandmother. Her name was Frida Misri, and her married name. Now, I knew her maiden name was Frida Sha'ala, Shaalo. That's how we knew. And there was a story that we were given when she was, our whole lives, a story that we were given that said that she came to America at age 13. She came as a bride. The person who she came to marry said, I sent for a bride, they sent me a child, and he sent money to send her back. And she said, and of course the family wasn't going to send her back. So there was a discussion about what they should do with her. And my grandfather was in the room, and he said, well, if no one else will marry you, I will. So, not like, this love affair. Turned out that wasn't quite the story. And let me show you how I found out. So you see here on this card, there's a petition number, 488840, okay? And when she got her naturalization, okay? And you could see her handwriting. So she did not have any education. Neither of my grandmothers had ever been to school. They didn't know how to read or write. So she learned to write her name when she came to America. All right, so we've got this number, 48840. So on Family Search, they have the reels where you can go and you can find the application for naturalization. And the application for naturalization is a piece of gold. So this is her application for naturalization, and I've circled where it says she came under the name Frida, but Frida, Shma, Schma. Now, how would I possibly have found that if I knew her as Frida Shala. So as it turns out, in talking to one of her nieces, the double surname, so this is where that double surname came in, was Shama. And if you say Shama fast enough, it's Shma. So that's where that came from. Now, I never would have found it if I didn't find this document. And look what it says. She came June 9th, 1907. Okay? She comes 1907. Okay. And these are all her children, by the way. She has 10 children. Now, this is her ship record. And it's hard to see, but she's listed here as coming with her brother. She's coming with her brother Ezra. Okay? This is 1907. And she's going all the way over here to stay with her sister. Her sister is Merhava Levy, and she puts Levy as the place she's going. Okay? Now, in the 1910 census, I find her living with my grandfather, Joseph. They're boarders in her sister's house. Okay? David Levy is the head of household. This is her older sister, Merhava. Now, I did a little bit of a deep dive, and on Ancestry, you can find directories. And I did directories, and I found out that they moved like every year, right? Why did they move every year? Because you got a free month's rent if you moved. Okay? So this is, something interesting about why people moved. I found so many addresses for them, I was going dizzy. This is my grandfather's registration card for the Army. And it shows where he worked. It shows the address where he worked. He says he has a wife and 2 children when he's fills this out, tells when he's born. This is actually an incorrect date because I found his Brit Milah record and it was August 1891. But people in Syria didn't know when they were born. They honestly didn't know when they were born. They had no idea. My one grandmother said I was born in the spring, so we gave her a birthday of April 1st. She thought she was a certain age when she came to America. This is his registration card. So now here, look, he's got a different date of birth, June 12th, 1889, right? And now this is the World War II registration card. And now he's living on 63rd Street. Here, he's working at 73 Allen Street, but it doesn't say where and he's living on Delancey Street. Okay, so you see the kind of information that you get off of these cards. But interesting, he didn't come till June 1908. They got married in June 1909. So the story was the wrong story. Another thing that I found, this guy, Isaac Shalom, who my grandfather worked for, okay, right? He works for Shalom and Company. My grandfather worked for him. And they had reached out to me and they said, we can't find his ship record. Again, I find his petition for naturalization. It says he comes under the name Isaac, I-S-A-K, Shalom, C-H-A-L-O-N, on the SS Europa. Never would have found it. If I didn't have this document, never would have found it. Okay? Witnesses. Tells me who the witnesses are, which are people in the community that he lives in. So, what are some sources for genealogy? All right. So, I'm going to tell you, if you asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have told you to go to SephardicGen.org as your main source. All of that information has now been transferred to JewishGen. Okay? So, JewishGen has a few different places where you can find Sephardic records, although I understand it's being slightly reorganized. You can go under Research, Sephardic, Research, Country, and Topical, where you can find certain countries. You could also go to Shul Records America, where you're going to find things like birth records or Brit Milah records from Mikveh Israel, which is an American congregation. There are no vital records in the Ottoman Empire from before the 20th century. Occasional family trees of wealthy and rabbinic families, but no vital records, none. Okay, they didn't exist because in the Ottoman Empire, you were classified as dhimmi, which meant that the Jewish communities operated independently and they had to keep their own records. So some of those records have ended up in Israel. Some of them have been lost over time. We've been slowly, as we get to it, parsing through. You can find a lot on genealogy.org.il, which I should have listed here, which is the IGRA website. Farhi.org has a lot of contributed trees. Main records, a lot you can get on Ancestry. You need to register for all these sites, and some of them you need to pay for. I would tell you that if you go to Sephardic Heritage Project.org, which is my website, you can go to resources, and then under there, you'll find that there are pages and pages of links to different websites like the Spanish archives, the Portuguese archives. There are lists of books that are important to have, things like that. These are important recommendations, but you're going to find a lot on JewishGen, also on Jobar, which is part of JewishGen, the cemeteries database. We've been able to contribute a lot of cemetery records. We recently just uploaded marriage records from a Jewish community in Buenos Aires, from Moroccan Jewish community, about 1,000 records. So there's rich things there, but there's a lot that we could be doing. I would also recommend that if you have questions, that you join a Facebook page, go to the JewishGen portal, go to Tracing the Tribe. Lots of times if you upload something or if you put out a question, these are very, very active Facebook groups. They have moderators and people answer. The JewishGen discussion group, also very, very active. And attend a conference. Go to an IAJGS conference. There are people there that are always willing to help you. And with that, these are some of my books and my contact information. And I thank you very much and look forward to your questions. Gonna stop sharing. Oh, wow. Lots of questions.
Sarina, thank you so much. This has been really a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot, and I see this as just the beginning of, a long discussion. I think we do have some questions, but I had a couple questions, so let me roll one or two of those out, and that'll give people a chance to post their additional questions as well. So one of the things that you had mentioned was that it's important to keep your material private, which makes sense to me. But then how do people know to reach you? Like if they want to add, like where's the boundary line between keeping things private, but sharing enough information that people will know that there's something to talk about?
Okay, so if you upload your tree to Ancestry or you link it through Family Tree Maker, okay, so what happens with Ancestry is you get those leaves, right? And those leaves are hints. And sometimes that hint will be to somebody else's family tree, okay? And Ancestry has an embedded system where you can send a message to that person through their website, and that person can then answer you. Okay, so that's how you kind of keep it private. Look, you can make it public if you like. I think that people that sometimes there are people in my family who don't think that's such a good idea. So I keep it private and I prefer to use the ancestry messaging system, but that's my personal preference.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Um, and uh, I had one other question, and after that, I'll look at some of the questions that are here. Um, so the other question I have is, you had mentioned that much more needs to be done. So
Oh, of
I
course.
was wondering if, like, what are some of the high priority projects that you would like to see done in the next few years?
Um, I I would love if we could get into Yeshiva University archives and pull out some of the information there. A lot of it is what I call harvesting. So you might have a paper copy of something or index cards. We recently are connecting with the Sephardic Brotherhood. They have cemeteries all over the United States. They have ketubots. They have lots of records that are handwritten, entered into logbooks that somebody needs to just type out and put it in an Excel spreadsheet. And from there, we get the information that we need in order to upload it to JewishGen and make it searchable. Because sitting in those logbooks, first of all, it's not safe. You can have a fire, pages deteriorate. You want to get the information into a searchable, at searchable. So like what we did for the Moroccan Jewish community in Buenos Aires, they sent us images of all these marriage records. And they were pages, full pages of descriptions. And it would be the mother's name. It would include information that we put into fields. The groom's father's name, the groom's mother's name, the witnesses, the bride's mother, the bride's father, the date of the marriage, their dates of birth, where they were from, where they got married, etc., etc., etc. And we took all of that, we databased it, we put it on JewishGen, but we sent it back to them. And now they have something searchable. So that's contributing to the community, but it's also helping because, as I showed you, Sephardic Jews are all over the world and they just have dispersed. So asking people to go to one place or another is not happening so easily. I did see a question about a handout. I did have a mention of it. I should have deleted that. I prefer that people just go to the Sephardic Heritage Project website to look at all of the different links because they change a lot. Okay. Just want to answer that one question.
Oh, so here's a couple of questions that asked about Sephardic Jews who settled in the Pale of Settlement. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
In the Pale of Settlement.
Well, I guess like Sephardi Jews who had settled in areas that were generally considered Ashkenazi areas. Maybe we could make that a little broader.
Yeah, that's not really my area. That's more a Michael Wass area. But I would say that as dispersions went or as intermarriages went, when I say intermarriage, I mean Ashkenazi Sephardic, people moved deeper into different territories. You have Bukharian Jews. They settled into smaller communities where they could get as far away as they possibly could.
Right. Right. I mean, I know that there were, and like you said, Michael Wass would know more about this certainly than I would, but I know like there were some Sephardic individuals, if not communities in Poland. Definitely
Yes.
there were individuals. And I think in Hamburg, in Hamburg, there was a Sephardi community.
Hamburg, yes, there was a Sephardic community there. Yes.
Yeah. Um,
My area is more the Middle East.
right. Well, it's really important because that's
Yeah.
something that most of us know little about. I certainly know a little bit about.
Yeah.
Um, Here's a question asking if your website has links to resources about Sephardic families in Livorno, Italy.
It has the listing of the book that of all the Livorno marriages. It's several volumes. And it's a tremendous resource, and there should be a link to their website.
Okay, thank you.
I'll actually make a note to check to make sure that that link is live.
So here's a question which I've actually heard before, and this is somebody who's from Spain who is not Jewish. You can see it probably in the chat also, but wanted to know how much of Spain's present-day population has Jewish ancestors. And let's see, there was another part to this question.
I've heard estimates that it's more than 50%. That's what I've heard. But I don't know that there's any way that you could figure out if that's actually true without doing DNA testing of everybody.
Right, and that person had a second question, which is that is there any way that he could go and do genealogical research to find the possible Jewish answers that he would have?
Well, I mean, he'd have to do his family tree, and he'd have to go into the Spanish and the Portuguese archives to look. I mean, we know the story of Jeannie Milgram, and if anybody hasn't read the book, My 15 Grandmothers, I strongly recommend you do, because she was able to go back, mother to daughter, for many, many generations down to back to the 15th century. So I don't think it's impossible, but she didn't find the Inquisition records in the Spanish archives. They were found in the Portuguese archives. And I understand that that border went back and forth, and there were a lot of border towns where people were hiding. A lot of small, tiny border towns where people were hiding.
So interesting. The why somebody was just recommending that the person who asked about the Spanish Jewish Spanish roots could do a Y-DNA
Right.
test.
I would do a Y-DNA test on uh, family tree DNA, and join the study. So it's not just about doing the DNA; it's also joining the study that was discussed here. Adam Brown and Michael Wass are managing a Y-DNA study of male Sephardic men. Like, we had one tree that I had done, the one I did in Branching Out for Sepharad, which was my chief rabbi. And we had a claim that there was a line of the family that had ended up in Ireland. And one of the professors that I was working with was a little suspicious. So he said, ask for a DNA test. So I did. And it didn't match any of the other family members. So we knew that it was bogus. So the Y-DNA is really, really important. And it doesn't matter if it's 500 years, you would still match, because Y-DNA will carry for thousands of years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So somebody actually had asked a question about that, which is, so the Y-DNA study does not include women?
No, Y-DNA is men.
Okay,
Women have two X's, men have an XY.
right.
So the
Uh,
Y-DNA, and you could start with the 38. But if you do the big Y, or you do one of the larger Y-DNA studies, you get more results, or you get better results. It's a little expensive, but it's well worth it. Yeah, the ones you're doing on Ancestry aren't the big Y, aren't the purely Y-DNA studies. You really want to do it on the Family Tree DNA website.
other,
Somebody asked if there's a third son.
yeah.
If there's a third son or a third daughter, you would typically name for someone who hasn't been named. Like maybe there's an aunt or an uncle who didn't have any descendants or didn't have a namesake. So that's where you would go first. My father's family, they had 10 children. So after they did all of the obligatory names, my grandmother was into movie stars and movies. And so she named for movie stars that she liked.
Love it.
Yeah.
Um,
My name is my grandmother that I'm named for. Her name was Estrina. Estrina, Estrina. So, which is a combination of like Esther and Serena. So, at the time, the movie Sabrina had come out in 1954 with Audrey Hepburn. So I got the name Serena. But all my cousins that were named for my grandmother got something that started with E. Esther, Estelle, something like that. And their Hebrew names were Esther. All of our Hebrew names are Esther.
wow. Okay. It's fascinating. Um, Somebody just made a comment which I thought was pretty interesting about that Jeannie Milgram found info in church records.
Yes.
So I don't know if you want to maybe make a comment about that.
So church records in Spain were very exact. She did find stuff in church records, but she also found it in Inquisition records. So read the book. And if you happen to go to if you go to an IAJGS convention, she tells her story, and she's just fascinating. It's really fascinating how she tells this story. And I'm sure you might even find it on YouTube. You know,
And it sounds really, really fascinating.
yeah.
Well, it looks like we are out of questions. Was any final comments you want to share with people before we sign off?
Well, I think that that if you're in the New York area, you definitely want to visit the Calico Center at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, run by JewishGen. Caitlin Hollander does a great job of helping people, and they have other volunteers that are there all the time. I think that that's a great place to start. I would also get some software and just start inputting data, and see how far you can get on your own. Lots of times people come to me and I'm like, yeah, but you have to start with yourself. Like don't ask me to find your great 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 grandmother because I need those hints from previous generations in order to figure out your family and your ancestry. So you got to start with now and then work your way back. So that's my strong recommendation for anybody who's doing research.
I think this, thank you so much for that and for really a wonderful talk. Like I say, I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody here on the Zoom session did as well. And I'm really pleased to let everybody know that our next talk will also be with Sarina on January 14th, and she will be speaking about Sephardic Jews in colonial America. So that's a very exciting topic as well, and in a way, a continuation of this topic. So on behalf of everybody on the call, really grateful for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us today, and we look forward to learning with you next week.
Thank you so much, Paul. Everybody have a great day and enjoy the week.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.